Well, maybe we could just start with a quick round of introductions. And it looks like Sam's going to be kicking us off with our presentation, but I thought it might be helpful just for you guys to know who we are and what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I'll just say, my name is Emily Stewart. I'm the Lending and Cooperative Development Manager at Northcountry Cooperative Foundation. So, all that means is I act as kind of a communication hub for all the technical assistance providers that work in community. I helped try to connect resources, and I'm spearheading our lending program, which I'm sure we'll have lots to tell you about once we find the money to start lending, which is the exciting part. But tonight, I'll kick it over to Sam for introductions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Estes. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
And does the screen look all right?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Well, great to be with you, to see a lot of familiar faces and some new ones. I'm Sam Estes, Housing Program Associate. I work on post-purchase technical assistance with 6 different communities. All right, so things we wanted to talk about. What is refinancing? When should you refinance? How does a refinance work? And that includes the budget, interest rate, and terms, and choosing a lender. We also wanted to talk about refinancing timeline and TA. And then we wanted to ask you other things we should cover. Does this look like a good list, or should we add anything?
Good start.
It looks good. Until you get in it, I'll have a question once you start getting towards number 3.
Yep, that's great. I mean, anytime, feel free to interject and ask a question. It's meant to be a conversation, not a lecture.
Oh, great. Thanks, Dad.
Yeah. All right, so let's start at the beginning. What is refinancing? So refinance, it's also called a refi for short, refers to the process of revising and replacing the terms of an existing loan agreement. And so if it's approved, the borrower gets a new contract, and that takes the place of the original agreement. And so during the process, it's a negotiation. For your co-op is seeking favorable changes to the interest rate and other loan agreement terms. And during the process, you can always negotiate for better terms. It's not just automatic. You're this type of co-op, you get these terms. You can fight for better terms, and hopefully going forward, that makes it more sustainable and more affordable in terms of lot rent once the mortgage payment and all that's factored in. Then at the same time, the lenders are reevaluating the co-op's financial position and offers loan terms and approval based on this evaluation. So it really is a negotiation. You want the best terms you can, but the lenders are looking at what type of community is this? Should we, looking at this or that issue, and seeing what kind of terms they want to offer. So it's definitely a back and forth. Any questions about the very basics of refinancing? All right. So next slide. When should you refinance? So for a lot of communities, it's a 10 or 15-year loan term. And when that loan term ends, you either have to refinance or pay off the remaining loan principal balance. And often the remaining balance will be $1 million or more. And so the best option is to refinance. Although, or I don't know if there's any communities that have an extra account that's with $1 million sitting there. Wouldn't that be nice?
It sure would, but then we'd be in trouble.
So then kind of throughout the presentation, we have these questions, and there are questions you can answer now, or things you can think about. We'll have a slide at the end where all of these questions are together. But the first one is, when does your co-op's loan term end?
I think Park Plaza's is 2025. Do you have
But,
the answers?
we do have the answers. I don't have it in front of me, but it's something to ponder. Let me see if I could pull that up quick.
I think Stonegate's is in 2027.
Let's see. That sounds right also.
Yeah, are we not supposed to look at the back page to get the answers? Like in the, when you're doing a puzzle? Sam, you're funny. Oh my gosh.
Yep. Yeah, so far so good. Yeah, 2025, 2027.
Okay.
How about let's see, Marjorie? Do you know for Medelia?
When we last refinanced?
Or when your loan term ends?
Oh, I don't know. I think we refinanced like 5 years ago or so. So
Yep, you refied in 2016. So that's going to mean that it's 10 years from then. So 2026.
I see
I wasn't
Bobby
too
Grubbs on
far
here.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have another person on.
Hello, Bobby. Can
Hello.
you hear us all right?
Yes.
So we're just right here, still close to the beginning. Do you know when your co-op's loan term ends?
2026.
Let's see. And you're in Pamel Creek?
Yes.
Oh, I have it as 2027.
It was so
But-
close to the new year, so it might be 2027.
Yeah, it's January 2027. So it could be December
You're
2026
gonna
also.
have your hands full. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was we'd signed on like December 29th of 2016. So yeah, right at the new year.
So this is great for all the communities represented. It's a few years out, so you have some time to think about things. So then looking at the slide again, you can also refinance your loan before the loan term ends, and that can be a few months before or a few years before. But you have to be aware of the loan agreement restrictions, like prepayment penalties. So then another question. In what circumstances would you refinance before the end of your loan term? Any ideas?
Would it be because you're doing a big project? Because that's what we had to do?
Yep.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
So Natividad, do you want to explain what that means? That like why you refinanced early because you had a big project?
When we got ready to do our $1 million worth of infrastructure, in order to make it work, we had to refinance our loan because we had actually we had a 30-year loan, and I think we were the only ones who did have that. So in order to meet the need and not raise the rent, that's what we had to do.
So that was just an opportunity for them to borrow an additional $1 million as opposed to taking out a completely new loan. So that's what a refi can be used for, is just that additional loan dollars, but with your existing mortgage company.
Yes.
What are other, oh, sorry. Yeah, what
Yeah,
are the
go
other
ahead.
circumstances that you might want to refi?
Due to balloon payment, maybe?
Well, so the balloon payment is at the end of the loan term when you have to pay off the remaining balance. So either way, you'll face that. So but say you're in a 10-year term, but you decide to refinance at year 7 or 8. What could be another reason?
If the interest rates go way down.
That's
Oh, yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one to do it for sure.
Yeah, if you're paying 6% on your current loan and the interest rates go down to 0 or 0.5%, then it'd be a good idea to refinance.
So Sam,
Yeah.
do you
definitely.
know, are you able to tell us what our percentages are? Does that show that in our term?
Let's see, not what I have pulled up, but yeah, we could look that up.
Yep, I can be looking that up as you go, but Natividad, you're interested in knowing what your interest rate is?
Yeah, I'm curious. I can't remember what it was. I know it's low.
Okay, is there anyone else that'd be interested in knowing what it is?
I think Stonegate's is 6%.
Okay,
All right, so let's keep going, and Emily will look that up.
Thank you.
So then getting more into the refinancing process. So how does it work? Some of the basic steps are to make a budget, then consider interest rates and terms, shop for lenders, and then choose a lender and apply for the new loan. So let's go through those one by one. So first, make a budget. So you all know for the annual budget, there's the key components are income and expenses. So income is things like lot rent and other sources of income. Expenses are admin, utilities, maintenance, the loan payments, escrow, and capital improvements. So you all are familiar with that kind of budget. And for refinancing, there's a different type of budget. Instead of income and expenses, we go with sources and uses. But it's similar in that there's kind of an input and an output. So the sources, that would be the loan amount that you're planning to borrow. So the total loan that's gonna that amount, plus any reserves that you're putting into it. So that can be from your operating reserves, or it could be capital reserves. And then the uses, so what comes out of refinancing will be the new principal balance. So it's oftentimes it'll be slightly more than the amount, and that could be because of capital reserves and transaction and closing costs. So, and just as income and expenses have to balance out, the sources and uses have to balance out with the refinancing budget. So I know that's, there's kind of a lot in that. Any questions about sources and uses?
Sam, do you want to go through just like a hypothetical scenario of like, Stony Brook Estates that has a principal balance of 3 million that they're refinancing? Just to kind of give a little bit of color to sources and uses, because it can kind of be dry. And so I just want to make sure everyone understands.
Sure. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So yeah, the Stony Brook Estates, so they're coming to the end of their loan term, and their balance at the end is going to be 3 million. And then they have in reserve, capital reserves about 100,000, let's say. So then that's going to be like, or let's see, would that be the sources or the uses?
Yeah, can I jump in here?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so Stony Brook Estates has a principal balance 3 million, so we're there. So then Stony Brook has their roads need a bunch of repairs, and they need to excavate it, and they need to repave everything, and it's going to be $1 million project. So like Natividad used her example earlier, they need an additional $1 million to do this capital reserve project because their reserve budget does not have that kind of money in there. And then in addition to that, there's a lot of different transaction costs and closing costs that are associated. So you need an attorney to review your documents. You've got to get an appraisal. You've got to go back and do all of the due diligence. Those are all the uses that are going to be going in. So in total, we've got 3 million in principal, 1 million to do this road repair. And let's just give a round number of transaction and closing costs of like $20,000 or $50,000. So we've got now $4,050,000. So who can tell me how much in sources do we need to take out from the lending agency?
1,050,000 to cover the difference.
Close. So they still owe that principal balance of 3 million. So they're gonna need the
Okay.
total of $4,050,000 minus their reserves, which is their operating and capital account. So say they've got, say they've got 50,000 in their operating and capital. That means they need to take out $4 million in debt capital. So that would be their sources. Does that make sense?
Because then they can use their capital. Is that what you're saying towards that? Because they have to, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
they're going to this bank and they're saying, hey guys, I need $4 million because it's got to cover what I still owe this other bank, or this, say the bank is, let's just make them two different banks for easy sake. So they're saying, hey, I owe this other bank $3 million. So I need to borrow $3 million for that. I need to borrow another $1 million for this road repair. But I've already got 50,000 in my operating and savings, so I can cover the transaction costs. So I only need $4 million from you. Does that make sense how that kind of balances out?
Yes.
Makes sense.
Cool.
Okay, so are we on number 3 yet? Can I just? Okay, so
So-
I did talk to Rock USA, and we went over the same scenario, right? I can't remember. I think they were doing a program. Oh, it was during RLI. And so I asked, when can we start putting money aside for the closing cost? And so you can do that at any time. So how do we figure that into the budget? Do we do that on our yearly budget, or pick a year? Like, say we pick this year to do it, but maybe not because we spent a lot of money. But to say we put an extra $1,000 away into the reserve account every month until our closing day.
Yep. Can I make a recommendation here?
Yes.
So you know how you have your capital improvement plan when you go to closing and the engineers are like, hey, you need to do this water repair in year 2, you need to do this road repair in year 4. And they say, in total, over this 10-year period, right, the length of the loan, you need to put $100,000, that's the wrong amount, but you know what I mean, $100,000 towards infrastructure repairs.
Right.
And then they do a calculation and they say that means that every year you've got to put $1,000 back into your replacement reserves in order to fund that. Well, you can do, Natividad, the same thing with your closing costs. So you can work with your TA provider to put together a budget for your closing costs, like all those transaction and closing costs. And then you can have a total amount. And then based on how much you're planning ahead, you can say, I need to put aside X amount of dollars every year in order to cover that total closing cost amount. So there's an alternative to this too, because so when we're talking about closing costs, and Sam's going to get to this in a second, and so I don't want to preempt some of this stuff, but you do have approval from Rock Capital to use your replacement reserves to fund your due diligence. So we can get to that once. The due diligence, if you remember from your closing, are things like your property conditions report, which is when those engineers come out and they ask you all your questions about the infrastructure. It's the $5,000 appraisal. It's the phase 1 environmental assessment. And then most people don't need a phase 2, but in case you do need a phase 2, it covers that. Again, all of those budgeted things can come out of your replacement reserves. All additional closing costs, like the 1% closing costs that Rock Capital takes out, if you want NCF to help you through the process, our TA fee for that, all of that can come out of the balance that you borrow from the bank. So you don't have to budget for those items. So if your replacement reserve is funded well enough, then you'll be covered. Otherwise, you can start saving. I would just recommend you adding a goal to your savings account and then start putting in money every 6 months into the savings account in order to cover whatever you'd like to cover.
And right now, because our reserve account is low, that's the purpose of saying, let's start putting some money aside. Plus, we've already done our infrastructure. So set aside, we'll be doing all our due diligence costs, our lawyer fees, your fees, and all the other sources that, you know, will have to be covered. Are we going to hit the amount of reserves that are needed at this time? Probably not. So that's why the question comes up, is it okay to start saving now for the next 5 years?
So
Well-
again, the attorney's fees, the ROC fees, the NCF fees, that'll all come out of the borrowed amount. So you don't have to budget for that now.
Okay.
So the things that you need to budget for, and again, Sam will get to this in a second, is your due diligence, which is the engineer reports. So if you don't have enough in your replacement reserves, I would just look at, or maybe talk to your TA provider about increasing your replacement reserve contribution on a monthly basis. And then that way you don't necessarily have to budget for it because it's going to be automatically taken out of your account. And then you'll hold that for either a rainy day, because maybe you'll have another infrastructure need, or it'll be for the closing costs. And that'll be up to you as a community.
Okay, Sam. We're going to need to
So-
do that.
So can you see this document?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, that's I think I captured what was described. So the uses are the balance at the end of the load term, and then infrastructure. In this instance, it might be road work, and then the closing and transaction costs. You add all that up together, that's going to be 4 million or 4.05 million. So then you'll need to, that will be your new loan that you're borrowing. Although if you do have some replacement reserves that you can use, you can borrow less and use some of those reserves to fund it as well. Does that make sense to everyone? All
Yes.
right, so let's get back to the presentation. Good questions.
scared.
Keep them coming.
I don't want to.
Yeah, let me just get that
Our
presentation
replacement
again.
reserves. We had Stonegate here, we just pretty much depleted our replacement reserves accounts. Is there any, can we put cash into that above and beyond what our monthly contribution?
Absolutely, you can.
We can just transfer from our operating account, put
You
in.
can, yeah, I think you could increase your contributions monthly, Dan. But I think what a lot of co-ops opt to do, because if you want to increase your savings, you could just, in order to have better control over your assets, you just actually put that from your checking into your savings. So you know how in your loan documents, you've got a minimum balance on your savings account?
Yep.
I'm not familiar with Stonegate's financials, but most of the co-ops I've worked with keep that at a minimum balance.
Yep.
Well, I think internally the board could just say, hey, let's increase this to $20,000 or by $20,000. And let's say we want to get to that goal within 12 months or 20 months somehow, right? So you make an internal plan and then you have control over those assets that you reserve that you could then use to your replacement reserves, or you could, so the savings sort of acts as that internal replacement reserves is what I think I'm suggesting.
So then talking about the sources, and this is something we just went over. So the loan amount is going to be equal to the principal balance. So if you had 300 or 3 million left over, that's going to be factored in, plus the reserve replenishment and the net reserve replenishment. So that's if you need to have a new project that's going to be $1 million, then you'll need to borrow an extra $1 million. But if you have $100,000 in reserve, you could subtract that. So it would be the net of what you need for capital improvements or what you need to replenish your reserves minus what you have. And then plus the transaction and closing costs. And then have some more questions here. So what is your co-op's current loan principal balance? What will the balance be at the end of the loan term? And then how much money is in your accounts, especially the operating and capital reserves? And we already kind of got into those discussions of some communities saying that some of their reserve accounts are low, some are higher. But these are good things to be aware of as you're coming up on a refinance in 2-3 years. Do you all need a minute to look these over, or are these things you want to take a look at afterwards? What do you think, Natividad?
In our operating account, we hold about 125,000 a
Mhm.
month.
Right?
I don't remember what our principal balance is. I'm cheating. Look, I have a list.
Natividad, what's your monthly expenses at Park Plaza?
The monthly expenses. Hold on. Not much.
And you hold 125,000 in your operating accounts?
We generally we start out the end of the month, we will have about 125,000 in there with everything. Then you pay everything off and we hold about between 50 and 60,000 after everything's paid
Mhm.
off. So does that sound about right, Sam? Somewhere around in there, 50 some thousand by middle of the month. Once our
Yep.
loan's paid.
Right. Usually we calculate it by the end of the month, and that's when it's at the low point. And
Yeah.
so I think it's been up around 70. It may be a little higher this month.
And we had
But-
like about 97,000 in there by the end of the month at one point.
Right.
So the reason I ask this is sometimes just as a budgeting tool, and this is a little bit of an offshoot, is something to think about, is how many months of expenses that you want to have in your operating and savings account for your co-op, right? So if your monthly expenses are $60,000, it makes a lot of sense to have 2 months of expenses in your operating accounts, right? So that would be that $125,000. But say you're a co-op that has $125,000 and you're operating and your monthly expenses are $10,000. Then you've got 12 months of expenses, and that's a lot of that money could then go into your savings, right? And then could go towards infrastructure repairs. So that's the only reason I mentioned that, is just, and that has nothing to do with a refinance. I just want to mention that as like a budgeting tool for you guys to think about within your own co-ops.
Yeah, and I think that one of the problems that we've come to find is the surprise hits that we've had the past few years. Like this year, the city wanted us to get rid of the ash trees. So we're almost at $30,000 for this project that we're looking at. And we're going to be paying that out of our own money because our reserve account doesn't do trees. So, and there's not enough to cover it anyway if they were able to do it. We've already utilized as much as we possibly can for some other stuff. So it's coming right out of the checking account at this point, which is fine, and we'll still be okay. So once we get that out of the way, because all the ash trees will be gone, we won't be looking at that again next year. So that's what's hard about saying, okay, I'm going to take another 50,000 and put it aside. And then all of a sudden you get slammed with some surprise, right? You just never know. It's hit or miss sometimes. But I still would like to put more in there, because right now we keep in our extra account, we keep a 1 month's worth of, if we ever had to pay our mortgage. If we
That's
couldn't pay,
Yes, so that's your escrow account. No, not your escrow. I'm sorry, your debt service account.
yeah.
Anyone else have thoughts about their current balance or balance in their accounts? Or wanted to comment?
When does Rock take out the monthly mortgage payment? Do they take that out at the beginning of the month?
It's usually in the middle. It's, I think, the 10th or the 15th. Is that
That
right?
sounds about right. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Because I think they want to make sure everyone's paid their rent, and then so that the account's fully funded, and then at that point they'll take it out. but it's never a surprise. We always get the statement and saying, okay, this much will be taken out. But I think they time it that way just so that people have paid their rent, and then it's taken out from that.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense to do it then. Yeah.
All right. So now uses. And so a lot of this is focusing on capital reserves. And so there's 2 questions for capital reserves when you're coming up to refinance. So first, how much money does your co-op need for capital improvements during the next loan period? And then once you determine that, how will your capital improvement reserve be funded? And so there's different ways to fund it. So you can fund it out of your existing capital reserve. So if you have a significant amount of money, that can just be rolled over and fund the new reserve. You can do it through the monthly contributions, which I think all the co-ops are doing. You can also do a portion through annual cash flow contributions. And that's where if it's a year where income was higher than expenses and you have a positive cash flow, then a certain percentage of that positive cash flow goes into your reserve. And then the last one is through the new loan, so additional borrowing. So that's what we were talking about. If your loan was a certain amount, but you can borrow more to replenish the capital reserve for immediate improvements or for improvements that will take place over the next loan period.
I have a question. So when we built the storm shelter, we had to take out an extra loan. We're actually loan tapped out, basically. Say that loan is still a little bit there when we get ready to refinance in that particular year. Will that be able to carry over as well? So you'll ask for that amount of money so you can pay that loan off as well? So
is the loan term, does it end at the same time that the main Rock Capital loan ends?
I don't know. We should look at that. I haven't looked at it in a really long time, and it's a fairly little amount of money. We could actually even up our payment to hurry up and pay it off.
Natividad, what's the interest rate on that loan?
Oh gosh, no idea.
If it's less than 6%, I would not recommend you rolling that into your refinance. Does that make sense? Why?
Yeah.
Okay, because if I'm assuming it's subordinate to your primary lender, right? So your primary lender is Rock Capital.
Yes.
And if you took out an additional loan, that means that they had to be in second position. So what that means is if your co-op fails and they liquidate your assets, it's going to go to Rock Capital first, and then it's going to go to that second position second. No one's going to fail, but that's why that's called that way.
Okay.
So if your interest rate is lower than the interest rate that you would get from whoever you refinance with, then you want to keep that subordinate loan, right? Because you're going to be paying less interest. But if it's higher than what you would get on that refinance, you'd want to take out that loan at the same time you do the refinance. So that's the calculus on that. You'd also have to look at your loan covenants just to make sure, like Sam was talking about, that there's not a prepayment penalty or any other things that would make it cost prohibitive. But it's smart to be thinking about what your subordinate debt is and how that would factor into the refinance.
Yeah, I would like to look at that, revisit it and see where we are, what's left to pay off. We do have a statement here we could look at and then find out, what the interest rate is. I haven't looked at them since we did it. And we did that with Minnesota Housing when we had to do the storm shelter and took a separate loan out. So that would be nice to find that out and get ready. I want to be as ready as possible. I've listened to so many people pulling their hair out, and I don't want to be that person.
Don't worry, Natividad. We'll be a partner with you if you want us to be that partner to help it be a painless process. One other thing I wanted to mention on this slide, because we've been talking about capital improvements that the community would choose to do by them saying, hey, we want to excavate all our roads and redo them, or we want to build a storm shelter. But Something that you also need to consider that Sam will talk about, I think it's in 2 slides, is the lender is going to require due diligence, right? You guys all got your property conditions report in phase 1, like we talked about, that you're gonna have to fund. So in that property conditions report, you get a 10-year capital improvement plan.
Oh.
And those are all the things that the engineers are saying, hey, you need to do these improvements over the next 10 years in order to protect the loan from the bank that's giving you money. So there's the things that you might choose to do as a community. And then there's the things that the engineers are saying that have to happen and have to come out of your replacement reserves. So I just want to make sure that we're making that distinction here when we're talking about capital reserves, that it's both from the property conditions report and what the engineers are telling you. And then it's also what you as communities, right? The experts of your own communities are saying, we definitely want to get this project done, whether the engineers say we need to do it or not, right? So it's both.
Look what just came in the mail.
Oh, I
The
can't
extra
see.
loan, the extra loan. So our interest rate is 6% on this loan for the storm shelter.
There you go. So
Mhm.
it's the same as rock. And so if when you refinance, if you get better interest rates than 6%, roll it in.
Okay, so we have 33,000 left to pay on this.
Okay.
Sweet. Oh, what a coincidence.
And then one other thing on funding capital improvements. So all of these things it's funded out of the loan or out of contributions. But another big possibility is funding through infrastructure grants. And with the help from a lot of you, we've helped establish in the state of Minnesota some infrastructure grants and are hoping to do similar work in Wisconsin. And so that when there are big infrastructure projects like roads, water, sewer, storm shelters, there's money available to help fund those, not just loan money, but grant money. And right now we're coming up on a couple refinances, and we're trying to use the Minnesota state grants to time those applications so that instead of borrowing an extra $1 million, they can get grant funds for that. And that means the amount that they're going to borrow is going to be less, and hopefully reduce their payments and their lot rent over the long term.
So that application is right now, isn't it this month?
Yep, the MHCRP.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I've got
That's
a question about the capital reserve. Isn't that is such a guess for capital improvements that you're gonna need over a 5 or 7 year period or 10-year period?
Right.
That is just a complete guess. You never know what's gonna fail. And then also just the cost of the replacement. I mean, you've got a pandemic that comes along, and on the backside of the pandemic, you've got a 50 or 100% increase in the normal costs that it was before the pandemic. So whatever you're guessing for the need for your capital reserve account, it's probably going to be low or not in the ballpark.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's definitely a guess, and we try to make it an educated guess. Usually for those plans, they do factor in inflation. So they assume that every year the costs are going to go up a certain amount, and they factor that into the amount that's needed for the reserves. But you never know. Usually the amount that's budgeted in is a 3% annual inflation. But if we have a year like this where it's 8 or 9%, that can throw off the guesses. And one thing that has come up as an issue, and we're hearing more from Rock, is to do updates to those capital improvement plans. And it'll be some work to do that, but I think it'll better reflect, what is actually the capital needs for each community. And so I think going forward with the annual budget, we'll try to be revising those, and even at other points of the year, we can do those revisions, because like you were saying, Dan, like things are changing all the time. And so the plans that you got, 5 or 7 years ago may not reflect as what the current state of things are.
I have another question.
Go ahead.
In doing the due diligence, you said that there's a phase 1 of property condition report by engineer. Is there any check on what their evaluation is? I mean, if they come out and say you've got to replace everything in your community.
Yeah, there is. So yeah, this was the next slide. So there's the as you mentioned, there's the property condition assessment and the phase 1 environmental assessment. So the property condition assessment, that's what generates the capital improvement plan. And it's on the one hand, it is we rely on the engineers to do a good job. During the process, we look for engineering firms that we know how to evaluate the systems in manufactured housing parks. But it is also a negotiation. Sometimes they'll come back with estimates about what needs to be replaced, and the community or NCF can take a look at it and say, I don't know about that estimate, and we can push back and negotiate on all that. And then, as you said, even with what gets generated, it's a guess in the future, and so it's subject to revision or subject to unexpected things that come up also. But we try the best we do to make an educated guess.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
When?
Go ahead.
When is a good time to start? A year prior is what I hear. Is that a good time to start getting ready? Or can I start right now? You're making me panic. I'm not gonna sleep.
No, I don't think you want to start right now. So, well,
No.
I mean, first you kind of want to start with, when do you want to refinance, and work backwards.
Yeah.
I believe for the phase 1 environmental assessments, they're only good for 6 months. Is that right, Emily?
It depends on the lender, actually. So
Okay.
I think it's Rock Capital allows a phase 1 to be good for 6 months, and Minnesota Housing, for instance, the housing finance agency in the state, it allows a phase 1 to be good for a year.
Oh, wow, that's nice.
And so usually the recommendation is about a year before refinancing to start looking at this and plan it out. The whole process can be done as fast as 2 or 3 months, but oftentimes you want a little bit more time. But yeah, you have to be aware of for each of these, how long is it good for? And also in Minnesota and Wisconsin, you have to be aware of the winter, because if you're doing the assessment in the winter, there's some things that are really hard to assess, and so it's better to do it when there's no snow or ice. So
because
no,
the winter might hide some stuff too.
right. But well, I mean, we want to get a good sense of what needs to be done, because if not, then that you'll have a lot of unexpected things that'll come up.
Yeah, it would come up eventually.
Right. Yeah. Maybe you can hide it from the lender, but you can't hide it forever. So
That's gonna happen. No way.
So So just backing up a little bit, so the different transaction and closing costs, there's kind of two different kinds. There's the due diligence costs, which are property evaluation costs. And so there's, as I said, there's the property condition assessment. So that's to see how everything is and to generate the capital improvement plan. Then there's the environmental assessment, and that's just to see if there's anything that needs environmental mitigation. It's called a phase one because they do a first phase to kind of evaluate everything. And the hope is that you don't need to go beyond phase one to phase two, but sometimes that happens. And that would be an additional cost. Then there's also the appraisal. And so, how much is your community worth? And that determines the loan to value ratio. So in general, for refinancing, it could be difficult to borrow more than the value of the property. And so it's important to know, how much is the property valued at. It's often you could only borrow up to 85 or maybe 90% of the value. But then it's also, something that's interesting for the community to know, how much is our community worth? And so does anyone know that? What's your co-op's current appraised value?
$5.1 million.
Oh, Natividad was on top of that.
That's right.
Natividad, how do you know that?
Because of our $1 million infrastructure, and it's been pounded in my head ever since. It added another $1 million to our appraisal for our taxes.
So I just want to note here, so your appraisal for your taxes are going to be very different than the appraisal that the lending institution is going to be doing.
Oh, I'm sure it will be, because once they hit in the ground and everything else, it'll be a way big difference.
So there's one appraisal firm that most people use. It's called Colliers, and they likely did the appraisal when you first did your closing or did your refinance. And Colliers, so our market development officer has been in touch with him about what an appraisal would look like for a resident-owned community, because in today's market, there's obviously been significant appreciative value of manufactured home communities in the ways that they're being traded, right?
Yeah.
I use that term intentionally. But your appraisal is going to be very contingent upon what that closing cost was. So it's not going to factor in that appreciative value. It's also not going to be taking into account anything that the accounting assessor is doing to value your property either. It's based on, I don't know, Colliers is kind of an enigma to me, but it's based on what the purchase prices of other communities are in your region, the size, acreage, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to clarify where that number is going to come from in that process.
So have they been contacted already, seeing how you're going to have quite a few communities in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, so they charge $5,000 per appraisal, and it's usually your lender that's going to be issuing that appraisal. So what we do in-house is kind of take the information that we know and help advise the lender on what we believe the appraisal is going to come out to. So Rock Capital notoriously does 110% loan to value.
Yeah.
So there's no loan essentially they won't do unless there's wild infrastructure improvements that need to get done beyond what the value of the property is. But during a refinance, the reason Sam's bringing up this 85% loan to value is because that's typically what we're going to be seeing if we find lower interest rate loans from, say, like a credit union or a more traditional banking institution.
And so does that factor in the fact that we've already done $1 million worth of infrastructure? That's going to change how this works as well.
I'm sure Colliers will have that information. I don't know how that affects your appraisal, unfortunately.
I mean, what I should have said more with Rock Capital based on the 1.1%.
So so you might be, so there's two things. So there's 110% LTV. So that's loan to value. And that's on the loan amount. The 1.1, I think you're thinking of is your debt coverage ratio, which is a different calculation. So I think I'm confused by your question.
Is that going to make a difference for Rock Capital going forward?
Rock Capital will lend on any refinance that is currently part of their portfolio unless there's been a default on the loan. That is my impression. That is my understanding of Rock Capital's stance, is they want to refinance you. They are going to be competing with other people that might be wanting to give you lower interest rates. But it's up to you, and we'll get to this. I'm getting ahead of myself, but does that answer your question though? Okay.
Thank you.
Just as a point of information, is a tax assessment for tax purposes, is that generally lower than the assessed value?
Yeah. Oh yeah, by far.
So that's, there's the assessed value, and that's used to determine property taxes. And then there's the appraised value, and that has to do with sales or with refinancing. So the assessment is usually done every year by the county assessor, whereas the appraisal, it's only done if there's going to be a sale or a loan or a refinance, and that's based on sort of the revenue generating potential of a property. So it'll be a different number and can oftentimes be very different from the assessed value, oftentimes higher.
Can I use a coupon?
But for the purpose of thinking
God.
about what the appraisal will be used for, it's good that the appraisal is higher than the assessed value, because that means the amount of money you can borrow will be more.
Right.
And then the other costs are closing costs. That includes things like origination fees, professional service fees, etc. So next, interest rate and terms. And so the interest rate, and this is how Rock Capital does it, but some other lenders may do it differently. It's usually broken up into what the treasury rate is, or what's called prime, plus servicing fees. And interest rates, they can be fixed or variable. Rock Capital offers fixed rates, but for other lenders, they could offer variable ones, which you have to watch out for. The range.
Sorry, does everyone know what a variable rate is?
Could you explain it? Because we have some extra people also.
Sam, do you want to explain it?
Sure. So it's a rate that will start at interest rate at one percentage level, but then it'll change, and oftentimes it'll go up. And so it can be a way to kind of for certain lenders to trick people. So it's something you have to watch out for. So they say, oh, we're gonna offer starting a 3% rate, but then it's variable. So you're thinking, oh, I got a great deal. It was 6 and now it's 3. But then in a few years, it may go up to 8 or 10%. So that's something you want to always ask, is it a fixed rate that it'll always be the same throughout the loan term, or will it vary? And if it does, how is it going to vary?
Not good.
Yeah, I agree that variable rates it can be really tricky, but one thing that people are really banking on with a variable rate is what that 10-year treasury or what the treasury rate or prime is, right? Because most banks are going to lend on what that, well, if it's a 10-year term loan, it'll be the 10-year treasury rate, which is referred to as prime, based on if prime is going up and down, right? That's why it's variable, because it's less risky for that bank, because they're saying, well, I'm subject to the treasury, so I'm going to lend at what the treasury is right now, and then I'm tying up that money for 10 years. If it's variable, it means it's going to go with the market, so it's less risky for the bank. So that's why the bank really likes the variable rates, and it oftentimes is more disadvantageous for the communities, because typically treasury rates are going to go up as opposed to down, particularly at this instance in history. So that's another reason variable rates exist.
And
I
so
never
then,
heard that word. I'm gonna go la la la.
and so the typical interest rate ranges for loans, thinking about current communities, are 5 to 6.5%. But as right now we're in a period where interest rates are going up, so they could go up from there. We'll see. Then term, which is also the length of the loan, and amortization. So the most common combination is having a 10-year term with a 30-year amortization. And amortization, it's a big word, but it basically determines the payment amounts and how much you're paying in principal and how much you're paying in interest each month, that split. And so the longer the amortization period, that lowers the monthly payment, but it also means at the end of the loan, you'll have a higher principal balance that's left over. And so there's a trade-off there between the amount of principal you're paying and the size of your monthly payment with a longer amortization.
That's why our payments are low.
Any questions about those? Amortization, term, interest rate?
So that's the amortization is why you get that big balloon payment after 10 years, right?
Yeah.
It's because they're dividing it, all those payments on a 30-year schedule, but they're only tying up their money. The lender is only tying up their money for 10 years with you because they want to go through this refinance, right? They want to have variable interest. That's the variable, right? Is they don't want to tie up their money for more than 10 years in a loan. So anyway.
The longer the loan, you're paying more interest to begin with and less principal. And then as time goes by, it'll go toward the end of the loan, then you're paying more principal and less interest.
Absolutely.
That's right. And each community has an amortization schedule, and you can, the amount, your monthly payment will always be the same, but the amount that's going to principal and the amount that's going for interest changes every month. And you can take a look in the schedule, how much is paying down the principal, how much is going to interest. And we can look that up and send it to you if you want to see. Okay, I think you're up, Emily.
Okay. So choosing a lender. So 11 of the 13 communities that we have converted at NCF have been with Rock Capital. So they're the main lender. So Rock Capital is a CDFI, a community development financial institution. So that means it's in their charter to lend on deals that traditional banks typically wouldn't lend on, which is a great mission, right? But Rock Capital is only one lender that might lend on these deals because there have been other entities that have been interested in potentially helping resident-owned communities, right, do that refinance process or lend on deals where residents are purchasing the land under their homes. So we also have listed is Minnesota Housing. So this is a new thing. NCF has actually lobbied the Minnesota State Legislature for 6 years. And it was until last year, the board of Minnesota Housing has decided to offer a product to Minnesota communities to lend on both acquisitions and refinances at it's either 4 or 4.5% at 85% LTV. So I just threw out a bunch of numbers. Basically, all I'm saying is Minnesota Housing is another lender. WEDA, which is Wisconsin Housing Economic Development Agency in Wisconsin, they also have done subordinate loans on resident-owned conversions in Wisconsin. We are currently working with the housing agency to try to figure out if they would also be interested, like Minnesota Housing was, in providing that first position financing at that lower interest rate. So we at NCF are constantly looking for financial institutions that are interested in giving low interest rate dollars to resident owned communities to either convert or refinance, because what that ultimately means for you, right, is lower principal and interest payments, which means that you can stabilize lot rents at a more affordable rate over time. That's the whole goal in all of this, is you're shopping your interest rates around, and that you're shopping your terms around to lenders in order to make the most advantageous financial decision for your business. So that's the whole reason we're going through this process, is because ultimately this is affecting what is the payments that you're paying out on these loans, right, is affecting the revenue and the expenses of your community. So things to consider. So things that are going to be affecting what a refinance looks like for this entity. So I talked about interest rate. So a lot of people have their interest rate at 6%. When you go through a refinance process, shopping this to other lenders to see if they can offer you lower interest rates is a great way to lower those principal and interest payments. Your loan term. So that's something that can be variable, right? So maybe you want to do a 5-year loan term for whatever reason, because you could get a better interest rate. That's possible. Or maybe you want to get a longer term loan term than 10 years, because you want to get that fixed interest rate for that period of time. Amortization typically doesn't go beyond 35 years, but that's something to consider, that a lender could go out to 35 years as opposed to 30 years, also reducing that principal and interest payment. Other things to consider when looking at a lender is, what are they requiring on that front end? So we talked about you have to take out the money for your balloon payment at the end, and then you want to fund your replacement reserves, but then you have to pay for your property conditions report or your phase 1 or your appraisal. Well, there might be lenders out there that say, hey, you know what? You got your property conditions report done 10 years ago. We don't need another one. We don't need you to go out and spend $30,000 on that. We just want to make sure you get an update to these sections, which could reduce those fees down to maybe $5,000 or $10,000. That's something that Sunrise Villa did in Cannon Falls when they did a refinance with a local credit union, is they actually removed all those due diligence requirements on that loan.
Wow.
So other costs that you should consider. Everyone's going to have an underwriting closing fee and deposits. They will be variable closing rates. So that's something to consider as well. So, so Rock Capital itself currently is lending at prime plus 3.25% interest rate, and that's a fixed rate. That total rate, so I think prime right now is at 3%, but it might have gone up the other day. So it's, around about 6.25% or 6.5% interest rate is what they're lending at right now. I want to explain something about that interest rate though from Rock Capital. 0.5% of that interest rate is what pays for NCF services to do the technical assistance with the board and to support the communities. Okay, so at Rock Capital, NCF gets actually written into the loan by getting written into that interest rate. So we call that 50 bips or 0.5% interest. I want to make sure that that's clear, because that's unique to Rock Capital financing. Natividad, do you have a question?
No, which is a really good deal, because, then we have technical assistance providers for the long term. How does that play into Minnesota Housing or any other bank? Is there a way to include that? Because then how do we pay for you if a bank says, no, we're not going to cover that, or Minnesota Housing says, no, we're not going to cover that?
So Minnesota Housing has made it so that we get written into the loan.
I did hear that.
So
yes.
So we helped build their underwriting criteria for their lending program, and we got written into that. If you would like to keep NCF but go with a different entity, we have something called a technical assistance provider TA agreement that we've all signed with you when we first closed. And we still offer our services whether you go with Rock Capital or not. So you can budget for it any way that you'd like. But typically, if you're going to go with a lender that's not Rock USA Capital, we're not going to get written into the loan in the same way. So it's going to be coming out of a different pot of money, but it's still coming out of your operating capital one way or another, if that makes any sense. So we don't get written into your principal and interest payments, but you'd be saving money because you'd have less money going out into that interest to be able to fund the technical assistance. So there's a lot of communities have done this in different areas across the country, and we're happy to work with you and work with whatever lender you choose as a community if you would like NCF to stay on as technical assistance providers. And I'll talk a little bit about the benefits of keeping us on, right? But that's, again, your choice. Rock USA Capital, it makes it a requirement of the loan that we get written into the loan, but other lenders might not make that a requirement.
Only if Sam continues to watch over the dunk tank.
Oh, Sam, you're muted.
You can write that into the loan if you want.
Okay. That was
We'll put it in the TA agreement.
yeah.
Okay, so Rock Capital also, they lend on 10-year terms, 30-year amortization, which we talked about earlier, and they do require an updated property conditions report, phase 1, and appraisal. Sam just took Prairie Lake Estates out in Wisconsin, Kenosha, Wisconsin, through their first refi, and they went with Rock USA Capital. So he facilitated the property conditions report with the engineers. Braun Intertech is what the cooperative decided to go with. Their phase 1, as well as coordinating the appraisal on the end of that closing period. Requirements from other partners, lower interest rates, but more document. So yeah, so other lenders are going to probably
NCB.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, we could use
So
it.
Rock Capital does have a program with National Cooperative Bank, NCB, where they will offer slightly lower interest rates. I think it's they would do prime +3. So I think it shaves off 25 points. They require more documentation up front, a stronger commitment before you go through your closing process, but they scrutinize a little bit more. So not all communities are eligible for this program, but if it's something that you're interested in trying to get your lowest interest rate with Rock Capital, talk to your TA provider to see if you would qualify for the program that they do use when partnering with NCB.
Another example too is with there's loans where WIDA has come in as a secondary partner, and they require an annual income survey to verify that they're serving people in the income range that they have money for. But that was able to lower the interest rates for that community.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
Do you find that people don't like that if they're doing that every year, having to turn over their income versus doing it once?
We try to do it as as least intrusive as we can, and so usually it's self-reported, and we'll just have a survey and they can circle, is their income over this amount or under that amount for this many people in the house. So they don't have to give the exact number. They don't have to provide any documentation, just fill out the survey.
Is that specific to the address or an open survey?
Say that again.
Is that specific to each address? So like you give out the survey to every single house? Okay.
It'd be by household.
Okay.
Okay, so we talked about some other lenders, like I said.
Can I interrupt you for a moment, Ms. Vidal? Is your question about whether or not that can be connected to an address?
Yeah, because I think that surveys are hard no matter how you look at it in communities such as ours. They're just thinking ahead, I think. Who's going to really answer it? Because I'm afraid. Do you know what I mean?
And luckily, the example that Sam was using was in Wisconsin with WIDA. And so that can certainly get factored into the conversation of who you'd be comfortable in refinancing with, right? Is those requirements. Because interest rate's not everything, right? It's also protecting your communities and knowing the qualifications that you can meet as a community as well.
Yes, thank you.
So, well, there's other lenders that we've talked about, right? The Sunrise Villa has refinanced with a credit union at a lower interest rate that didn't have those due diligence requirements. We've talked about Minnesota Housing and WIDA. There's other lenders, right, that are also out there that are not necessarily going to be credit unions, but are going to be those more traditional banks, right? And they're going to offer those lower interest rates and more flexible terms. But I just want to note something about those opportunities. Rock Capital, credit unions, housing finance agencies, they're going to have a mission to sustain and preserve and support affordable housing. A more traditional bank is not necessarily going to have that mission or creed. And so while they could offer those lower interest rates and more flexible terms, it's just really important that you're careful about what gets written into your loan and what you're prepared to take on as a community, because they're going to have different interests at play there. And so that's just something, not as a warning, as much as just a thoughtful consideration to take into account when you are shopping around and looking at different lenders. There are lots of great CDFI credit unions. There's lots of great housing finance agencies, and that's likely what we would direct you to at NCF. But we obviously want to put other organizations or other for-profit entities into the mix if you so choose, and we can do that. But I just want to make sure I clarify what that means to do so. Next slide. So timeline, we've got 2 refinances that are going to be happening next year, hopefully April. And I'll just say that they started planning probably late last year. So that's probably the biggest lead time I've had for any community. And that's because they're considering potentially trying to get subsidy through the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. So 1 to 2 years is plenty of time in advance. I think Sam, you started with Prairie Lake, 6 months in advance before they're getting to their closing. Is that right?
Yep, I think in May, and we're hoping that they'll be able to close in October.
So I just want to give a range here that it's really good to start planning ahead. It's really good to start talking to your TA provider, but based on how much kind of hair is in the deal and what you're looking at trying to figure out here, plan ahead if you're looking to shop around or you're looking at trying to incorporate subsidy into your ultimate takeout. But 1 year in advance is plenty of time if you're not trying to take those factors into consideration. If you do refinance ahead of when your 10-year mark is, there is a prepayment penalty as written into your loan covenants. It's about 1% of that principal interest or that principal payment. It doesn't tend to be a lot of money, particularly how much you could potentially save if you refinance early at lower interest rates, but it is something to consider. It's in your loan covenants and we can look it up and we can add that to the pro forma to help walk you through what that looks like. Your interest rate might actually be lower than what an interest rate you might find when you actually come up on terms. So having that interest rate for as long as possible is also something to consider. Engaging your engineers to do your phase 1 and property conditions report. Sam mentioned timing of year is really important. So maybe you think you can do your refi in 6 months, but you're starting at the beginning of winter. We all know that the ground gets frozen. And so there's only a certain amount of time that the engineers are going to be able to go out and get that done. And then there's processing time on the lender's side, right? It takes them a little bit of time to assemble the application And then it takes the underwriter time to make sure it meets all their criteria, take it to loan committee and come back and present a loan letter to the cooperative. And then obviously the membership needs to vote on any new loan that the cooperative is doing. So factoring that time in advance as well. Any questions on timeline?
I have a question. So, this is big for our board to take on. And you think about communities that only have like 2 or 3 board members and trying to get ready for this. And then you said, we have to engage our members. Is there any point in time where you could engage the members to say, on such and such date or year, this is what we're looking at to get ready to refinance? So you start also educating them so
Absolutely.
that
I
they don't
think
come
there's
one
always
day.
Yeah, I think annual meetings are a great opportunity to talk through not only your budget, but also when your refinance schedule is, so that you can continue to repeat that every year. Hey, we're going to do a refi next year. Hey, we're going to we're going to start this, we're going to start that, right? It's going to get written into your capital improvement plan. It's important for members to be engaged, but ultimately, NCF would like to be your partner in the refinance process, and you can choose. That's the next slide that I'll get to, but we want to be a support to you, but you have to choose that support. You don't have to accept it, right? Is what I'm trying to say, because helping you through a refinance process actually is outside of our existing TA agreement. And so if you would like NCF to help you with the refinance agreement, what your TA provider would be doing is walking you through something called a TA agreement that incorporates that refinance process into that. And then we have it written in that the contract, we tried to make it as flexible as possible, and your TA provider can show you all the different ways that we're trying to create flexibility into it. But we are just asking 1% of the refinance loan amount, or 25,000, whichever is larger. And again, that's not coming out of your operating, that's coming out of your total loan amount that you're taking out.
Whichever is
And
smaller, right?
Whichever is smaller. Yes. Did I say it I probably said it the opposite way. Whichever. Yes, whichever is smaller. And so, I mean, really what we want to do is we want to be your guide. We want to be helping shop those interest rates around. We want to help you do the, not just help coordinate the due diligence on the engineer side, but we also want to help due diligence on what are people offering, and, in those loan covenants, what are the things that they're requiring, and what are the things that the board needs to be considered, and how that factors into your annual budget, Natividad, like you're talking about. Those are all things that NCF wants to support the cooperative in doing. And then beyond that, right, it's also signing your TA agreement. So after that refinance, we continue our existing technical assistance, which we believe that, as TA providers, we provide stability and consistency within your community, help continue support around business and governance, connect you with existing resources or find new resources. And then we help guide and support on that lender relationship that can sometimes get complicated in terms of what they're asking and what they need. So that's the role that TA can provide in that refinance process. Natividad, you had a question?
We were fortunate enough to be able to already have you in existence with the Rock Capital, correct? But we also had to pay you above and beyond to help us do certain things, like with Braun Intertech and everything. So we've had a little taste of what that's like, and I think that's been a big plus. So that will give us a one-up when we get ready to refinance again, I think.
Yeah, and anytime, if you're already thinking about this, I mean, Sam can provide you what the agreement would look like, so you can go ahead and look it over, see if you have any questions or any amendments that you'd like to add to it as well. We're just trying to be as transparent as possible about our roles and responsibilities as technical assistance providers, because I know that it can get murky in there, and we just want to be clear about the partnership that we want to continue to have, and make sure that the cooperative knows that they have agency in that process as well. Okay. So this is kind of the final slide of all the questions that we've walked through in this presentation. Sam, did you want to, so I think we've taken a pause and talked through these questions. Sam, are you thinking with this slide going back and seeing if anyone had wanted to go back to any of these questions?
I think mainly just wanted to put them all together in case folks wanted to write them down, or we could also email out the presentation or these questions in particular. But yeah, if anyone taking a look at these now had questions about them or wanted to comment on it for their community.
I have a question.
Sure.
How many refinances have been done already in the last couple of years?
Oh, wow.
Us.
Quite
That's a
few?
great question. So Bennett Park, Medelia, Park Plaza, Prairie Lake, Sunrise. I think, and then Bennett Park is coming up on their second refi next year, as well as Five Lakes.
So quite a few.
Yeah, we've walked many communities through a refinance process.
At the end of the process, have the lot rents gone up because of the process? Or have they stayed the same, or have they gone down? Is there a general trend?
Marjorie, you had your hand up.
I was gonna say for us, everything had stayed the same. And we were even looking at lots of infrastructure projects that were needing to be completed right after the, I want to say within about a year after the refinance, we had a big infrastructure, a water sewer project and everything. And our rates had maintained to be the same.
So I guess my point is, we're a pretty small community, and getting interest in this process is going to be very difficult. The real point is going to be, I think, on the residents' interest is going to be, is the lot rent going to go up or down at the end of the process, or stay the same? So just in general, the whole refinance process doesn't have a really big effect on what the lot rent turns out to be.
Dan, I'd really say it's dependent on your community and the state of your community and what sort of infrastructure improvements you're looking at doing. So
How big of a project needs to be done and how soon?
Not much, actually. I mean, the biggest project we would have would be replacing the water lines, and that would just be astronomical for us in a cost. So, but other than that, I mean, there really isn't that much that needs to be done.
I think, Daniel, too, you have to take into consideration too, when you do your water lines, you're doing your streets as well.
Yeah, mainly
Okay.
because they would be pretty much dug up, so.
Yeah, and ours, we didn't raise the rent during our refi either.
You didn't?
No,
I want to say, I think that those are two great examples, but Dan, I just don't want to get your hopes up that would be until we walk you through a pro forma and really look at what your initial appraisal was for, what your principal payment is, what the potential cost at water sewer. That's all something your TA provider can walk you through. I know that you just switched over to Kathleen, but we can all work together as a TA team to support Kathleen in the process and helping Stonegate kind of figure out what that might look like. I just don't want you to have the expectation that your lot rents would stay the same, because we just don't know without looking at the numbers. That's all.
Right there, I understand there's many variables, but I just wondered if there was anything if there was a trend to this process, you know, that it really affects, the process really affects the end result, or if it pretty much stays the same.
Yeah, maybe you can say like during purchase, it's almost always lot rents go up some amount, but during refi, it really varies.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, it is 7:27, y'all. So we really did talk about refinances for an hour and a half, which is incredible. Y'all had some great questions. I want to be thoughtful about the time, but I also don't want to cut anyone off. Does anyone have any burning questions about refinances that we didn't get to during the presentation?
I'd really like to see what Minnesota Housing has to offer, because they're the ones who helped us with our storm shelter as well. So they already have a plus on us.
So we're hoping that Minnesota Housing will do 2 refinances for the first time next year, Natividad. So we will absolutely let you know how it goes and can advise based on those experiences.
That'd be great. Even just the structure of what's available through them. I think that's a great opportunity.
Sure.
Thank you so much for all the information. And
Yeah.
now I got to go to sleep. Thanks so much. I think about this all the time because I know it's unbelievably how fast the time goes when it gets there. And you think, oh yeah, 2025, that's a ways down. It's not when you're over 60 and you're counting every dang day, right? So makes me nervous a little bit, but I think you're well prepared. So that's going to be a plus.
Yep,
Yes,
there's
thank you very much for all the information. It was really eye-opening.
It is, isn't it?
yeah, thank you all for all the questions.
Yeah, that I didn't know that there was that much involved with it, and basically how much time it takes is just how deep you want to go into it.
Yeah.
And it also just say for Natividad, just relax. Try not to stress about it.